Planting transplants in the garden is one of my favorite parts of gardening. It's so rewarding to head out with your transplants and your trowel and dig and put those transplants in place. There are a few key things you can do to help those plants grow well when you plant them in your garden. And in today's video, I'm going to share 7 tips for successfully planting transplants in your garden. But if we haven't met before, my name's Angela from Growing in the Garden, and I love to share garden inspiration and helpful tips so you can be successful in your own garden. This first tip is probably the most important, and this happens before you take anything into your garden. It is so important to choose the best transplants to bring into your garden. If you're starting seeds indoors and you have transplants that have struggled, don't plant those out in your garden. Oftentimes those problems are going to continue. Choose the healthiest plants to plant out in your garden. The same thing applies when you go to the nursery. Look for ones that are healthy and green. Look at the leaves. Look at the undersides of leaves. They should be free from pests and diseases. You don't want to bring diseases and pests home. You want to look for healthy roots. It's okay to tip that plant into your hand and take a look at those roots. Make sure the roots are nice and white and healthy and not circling the container. Plants that are really leggy means they probably didn't get enough light throughout the growing process, but nice, tight, stocky stems means they had plenty of sunlight. And also make sure that the plant is not too large for the container that it's being grown in. Try to avoid plants that are already blooming or already have fruit forming on them. The next tip is to harden off your seedlings. If you started seeds indoors, you will definitely need to take 7 to 10 days to harden off these seedlings. Hardening off means that you're helping that seedling make the transition from an indoor grown seedling to a plant that can survive and thrive outdoors. Start with an hour or 2 outside and gradually work up to longer times. If you purchase transplants from a nursery, they may already be hardened off and ready to plant, but you may just want to give them a day to adjust to the conditions of your garden. I just did a video with more information about hardening off seedlings, and I will link to it right here. The next tip is to plant on a shady day if possible, or at the best time of day depending on the season that you're planting. For spring transplants that are getting accustomed to cooler temperatures, plant them in the morning so they have the warmth during the day to adjust before the cooler nights. If you're planting during the warmer months, plant transplants in the early evening so they have the cooler temperatures of nighttime to adjust before the next day's heat. The next tip is to prepare your soil. A plant growing in your garden is going to reflect the quality of your soil. This is an important step. Focus on adding organic matter at the beginning of each season. Test your soil pH and make adjustments if the soil is too alkaline or too acidic. Add fertilizer based on the recommendations from a soil test. So the next tip is to do the actual planting correctly. So here are the steps to follow when you want to plant transplants in your garden. Water the transplants several hours before planting them out in your garden. That will give the plant's roots time to absorb that water, and your plant will better tolerate being transplanted if it is well hydrated. Check the soil moisture of the planting area. It should be moist but not too wet. Next, dig a planting hole as deep as the plant's root ball and a little bit wider. Now you're going to gently remove the plant from its container by tipping it over into your hand. If it's hard to get it out, gently tap the bottom of the plant to encourage the seedling to come out. The best way to handle the transplants is either by the leaves or by the roots. It can grow more leaves and more roots, but not a new stem. So don't lift and pull on the stem because often a plant can't recover if you damage the stem. If the roots are mainly concentrated on the bottom, gently loosen those roots. Put the transplant in the hole that you dug at ground level or a little bit higher. An exception to this planting rule is tomatoes, which are planted nice and deep. Fill in the remainder of the hole with soil and press the ground firmly but gently. Firming the soil encourages good contact between the transplant's roots and the soil. Spread mulch around the transplant, keeping it an inch or 2 away from the stem. Gently soak the soil after planting to eliminate air pockets and help the roots settle in. The next tip is to pay attention to the watering needs of that new transplant. New transplants are going to need more frequent watering until they become established in your garden. Don't let the soil on the transplant or around the transplant dry out. Pay attention to your plant, the soil and weather conditions, and then water as needed. The last tip is to protect those new transplants. They are now exposed to some outside elements that they weren't accustomed to before. So if it is hot, provide shade for those new transplants. If it's windy, the plants are going to dry out quickly, and you may want to provide some kind of floating row cover to protect the plants a little bit from that wind. Young transplants are also very tempting to birds and other pests, so you may need to provide additional protection in the form of cloches or netting or tulle. Barrier methods are usually the most effective. Planting transplants is one of my favorite parts of gardening. It really is so fun to dig in the dirt and put that new plant in place. Enjoy the process and do all the right things to give your plant the best chance of success as you plant it out in the garden. Thank you so much for watching.